I'm pleased to welcome to the programme live now Charles Freilich. He is a former Israeli Deputy National Security Advisor, and he's the author of Israeli National Security, a New Strategy for an Era of Change. Welcome to you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. And a senior fellow at the Institute for National Security Studies in Tel Aviv.
Pleasure to have you on the programme. How significant is it that Hezbollah attempted to hit Tel Aviv today, even though the rocket was shot down and no damage was incurred?
Well, it's a further escalation. It's a step up. It's not that Tel Aviv is, or the lives of people in Tel Aviv are more important than those of the people in the north. But the fact is, it's hitting Israel's the biggest city, the overall the largest population center, the central of the country, and it's a step up. But it was only one rocket, and fortunately, it was intercepted. I think I would take a little bit of exception to the way that you originally presented the situation at the beginning of the broadcast. I understand that people want to see the human aspect and human costs, but the story here isn't really the civilian cost on either side of the border. The real story is that there is a brilliant operation underway in which a terrorist organization, which took an entire country, Lebanon, hostage, and has been building up its forces now for years and years, has been hit very, very hard with remarkable accuracy. The story isn't the occasional misfire. It's the fact that, in essence, all of the attacks have been pinpointed. They've been successful. You're interviewing people who, in many cases, have an interest in presenting a false picture. The fact is, almost every home in southern Lebanon, I'm just slightly overstating the case, almost every home in southern Lebanon was actually a Hezbollah target. Okay, people had rockets in their homes. Some of them you can hide in the kitchen cabinet, others hid in other places. And they've been preparing for this for years, and they were hit with dramatic success, pinpointed success.
Well, just a word on the figures. I mean, one thing we do know, according to the Lebanese Health Ministry, is that there are 50 children among the dead. Now, as to Israel's strategy right now, we know the Israeli government wants to try and enable the return of Israeli citizens to their homes in the north. Hezbollah, of course, though, has significant firepower. Can the group really be defeated now with Israeli airstrikes alone?
All right, so first of all, let me just add one more sentence. So maybe 52 children, but who is responsible for the children being in homes in which there were rockets? As for I don't think the objective here is to defeat Hezbollah. That's probably a bridge too far. The objective here is to downgrade them significantly, and that's already been partly achieved. And the other objective is to move them out of southern Lebanon, maybe to the Litani River, so that their short-range rocket arsenal, which is the overwhelming majority of something like 150,000 rockets, are out of range. That doesn't solve the problem of the mid and the long-range rockets, but those numbers are much smaller, and that makes the military operation more achievable. But again, the objective is to degrade them and force a ceasefire, because in the end this is going to have to end diplomatically, force a ceasefire on better terms for Israel to let the people in the north go back home to their homes.
As I mentioned a little bit earlier on, today Israel announced it's calling up 2 extra reserve brigades to the north of Israel. Is that a sign to you that potentially a ground invasion of Lebanon is on the cards now?
Well, I think it's certainly in the cards. That's not the only sign. At this point, I don't know that there isn't a decision to launch a ground operation. I wouldn't be surprised, because that may be one of the things that has to be done to move Hezbollah out of the south. That still doesn't necessarily have to turn into an all-out war. That will depend on Hezbollah's response, and yeah, it could go in that direction.
Isn't there a risk here that even if Hezbollah is badly degraded, its military capability is degraded here, that it actually won't necessarily destroy support for the group? It could grow, couldn't it? It grew after the war in 2006. And then in time, Hezbollah will build up its arsenal again and will be able to strike Israel again.
Well, unfortunately, history in the Middle East is such that we don't solve problems. We try and gain time until the next round. And I think that's probably the case here. No one thinks we can solve the Hezbollah problem. It's too big. I don't think it will gain support. I think it's just the opposite. The Lebanese public, as opposed to Hezbollah, I don't think wants this war. They were hit very, very badly in the war in 2006. And they understand that if this really escalates, then the damage, I would say the devastation in Lebanon will be far greater than then. So they don't want this. It doesn't build up support for them. There may be a short-term rallying around the flag phenomenon among the Shiite population, but I don't think we've seen that among the rest of the population. And again, I think people will be quite concerned when this escalates beyond. But you have to, again, to put this in context, imagine if someone on one of France's borders started firing thousands and thousands of rockets into France, including Paris. What would France do about this? What would any country do about this? So what Israel is doing is not a war of aggression. It is a war of defense. And to some extent, at least, it is absolutely necessary. You can argue how much Israel should do, how it should do it. But in and of itself, I think it's an absolutely necessary operation or even war.
You talk about it being a necessary war of defence, and I want to talk about Gaza as well then, if I can. The death toll from Gaza, over 41,000 lives. Does Israel have the resources to fight a war on two fronts now?
Well, I think people don't quite understand the war in Gaza, war writ large, excuse me, ended in January. Since then, we've had two major operations, one in Khan Yunis, one in Rafah. And that was a spike in each occasion. But basically, it's been low-level hostilities since January. And the number of Israeli troops in Gaza is very, very small and has now decreased even more because last week an entire division was moved to the north. So if you ask me, does Israel have the military capacity? The answer is certainly yes. The problem is different. The problem is that the reservists, many of them have done a half a year of duty, in some cases even more, away from families, away from their places of employment. That's the real problem, not the ability to fight on both fronts. People will, if the war really erupts, people will show up. I have no doubt about that. There will be a socioeconomic cost after the war is over.
Just a final question for you then. Iran, of course, the key backer of Hezbollah. Do you think the country is going to get directly involved now?
Well, I think the Iranians have shown just by virtue of their behavior since October 7th that they don't want to get involved in a direct war of their own for the most part. Actually, one of Hamas's biggest objectives on October 7th was to draw